Always had an interest in politics, and when the seat became open, the party had a candidate that I knew I could do better than she would have. And I believed in myself. I always give back to my communities. I always want to leave things better than I found it. I have that natural drive to do good things and really give back. And that's why I got involved in politics. And I met Chairman Maloney shortly after that. Really appreciate his passion for the sportsmen and really what it stands for. Also, I've been hunting since, 9, 10, 11 years old probably, doing it a little bit on the illegal side a little bit early, but who didn't, right? Who didn't have their grandson out there and you shot that squirrel. You were over their shoulder with that gun because you wanted to see it kick. You wanted that 12 gauge to leave that black and blue mark on their shoulder. But that's what it's about. And I really feel that the part of the Game Commission and where we're headed is we're forgetting about that tradition. We're forgetting about that grandfather out in the woods with his grandson doing those things, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that, but if you ask them, you're a criminal, we're going to punish you for stuff like that, and it's just those little things that keeps that 12-year-old hunting until he's a grandparent, until he's taking his grandson out there. That's really what I want to continue, that tradition, because it's great. I have memories of am I going on too long?
It's fine.
I have memories of my grandfathers and other relatives that are no longer here. And some of my best memories are deer camp or small game. I remember we went out and we got 42 squirrel one weekend. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. But it was a great time. And then you're playing poker at night. And it was all the time, and it was great. It was the people. You would go down to the local clubs, the sportsmen's clubs. And we had friends. We were 3 hours away. We had a camp up in Clearfield, a little bit north of Du Bois. Those folks, if they drove by you in the summertime, guess what they did? You'd get a knock on your door, and they were standing there. Hey, we were just driving by, wanted to stop in and say hello. So it's the fellowship, and it's great people. It brings out a side of people that we don't see these days. And it's a whole picture. It's not just out harvesting an animal. It's the culture. It's just who we are. It's great, and I really enjoy it. I'm glad I was raised the way that I was. I'm glad I'm here, and that's really why I'm here today. Get your feedback, and we just want to see where this takes us. So thank you, Chairman.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another representative here. I'd like him to introduce himself.
Yeah. So I think everybody knows who I am, Dave Zimmerman, right here in my district. Dave asked about doing a meeting here, and I said, yeah, this is probably a good place to do it. Not much time. We didn't have a lot of time to get the word out there, but thanks to Wilmer Hoover for with Penn, that heads up Penn Dutch, for at least getting it out there and letting a few people know. So looking forward to what these guys have to talk about. Dave, I think you've been on Game and Fish maybe ever since you're there.
It's my number one choice of a committee since I came in. So I came in 11, sworn in 11, when I was asked, this is the committee that I wanted number one. I did children and youth, I did health, I did labor and industry, I did all that. I was a carpenter. I worked for myself for 25 years. I was an engineer in a manufacturing plant. So for me, there was a wide variety of things in Pennsylvania that was important, but nothing was more important to me than knowing that we had a tradition and a heritage in Pennsylvania, which is what has driven me for all these years, and waited to be the chairman, which I didn't know if it would happen. And through that period of time, I stayed in office, and we have a real dynamic in the House, which I'll spare you the pain of saying, but we are in an R and a D balance of right now 101 to 101, and it's a problem. And through that, I actually sit as the minority chair, which the reason I'm explaining that to you is this type of public outreach has never been done. And so my passion was, whether I was in a majority or not, I went to leadership and I asked for their blessing, and here we are. And for me, this is why I'm doing this. There's a lot of things I can get into later tonight, but today's point, this has been something that I know traditionally and heritage-wise, that if you don't mentor a child, they almost will never take it up.
That's right.
And so we actually passed the mentoring for the kids, and then we passed mentoring for adults, because those are the kids that grew up that didn't get mentored, and now we wanted to be able to mentor the adults. So there's a lot of history here, a lot of things, and just to give you this statistic, only 6% of Pennsylvania residents are sportsmen. So we are way outnumbered. 94 to 6% is a big imbalance. So if we don't keep focused, if we don't keep on the mission, we're in trouble. So thanks, Dave, for that question.
So Penn Dutch is not just a couple miles from here with the sports club. Wilmer, what's the membership now? Like 1,300 or? Yeah, 1,400. 1,400. So, and that's just one of the clubs that's real close here, and there's others throughout Lancaster County as well. So a lot of sportsmen, Lancaster, it's a big deal. Yeah. And to Eric's point, yeah, we grew up as kids sharing a shotgun. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did, and squirrel hunting was a big deal. And
we would take them to school,
like
have them in a trucks at
we had
school.
them on the
Had
bus.
them at school.
Yeah.
We would.
Yeah.
We didn't do the bus. You guys are more
had 'em on the
outlaws
bus.
than we are.
I'm a little older.
No, but we would go squirrel hunting after work, or we would go deer hunting after work, and we had them. I mean,
We took them on the bus, and they went to the principal's office. They took care of them until we left. Imagine that today. And we carried that shotgun back on the bus. And the bus driver would say, "Do you want to get out here at this field?"
Yeah.
We didn't even get home. So there was a lot of really neat tradition.
today.
Yeah.
I seen a grouse there this morning. I'm gonna let you out right here and go get it. You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good stuff. So another young gentleman here. This is Griffin Caruso. He's my executive director. Publicly relations is Charles Lardner. And I'm going to ask Eric to start us off with the pledge. If you'd all rise.
Rise if you're able.
Oh, good.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Super. If you don't mind, my attire is what I want to wear. We're not in the regulation of the house where you got to wear a suit and tie. Yeah. So what we're going to do here, guys, I'll probably have to move this a little bit, but what we're going to do here is start off with some basic information, and hopefully this program works. We think we got it put together well, and there's going to be a couple neat clips here tonight that'll be very, very beneficial. I think you'll be very shocked at some of the data that we're going to share with you tonight, and here we go.
So let's begin. We have a basic agenda for today. We're going to start to be on the same page with just some general information. What is the Game Commission? What is the Fish and Boat Commission? Who are the commissioners? What are some of our concerns? What are some of our solutions? And finally, the most important part of the listening tour is open conversation. So let's begin. What is the Game Commission? Well, the Game Commission was created by the legislature back in 1895, specifically to protect and conserve wildlife. It was not created to encourage hunting. You didn't need to encourage hunting in 1895. In recent years, the Game Commission has been tasked with encouraging hunting and outdoor recreation. Their key functions are wildlife management, which is ensuring there's enough game, enough healthy forests, assessing game numbers, providing food plots, habitat, hunting and trapping regulations, law enforcement, combat poaching and trespass, and public engagement. That's hunter safety courses, providing huntable game lands, and the licensing process. Their director is Stephen Smith. He was appointed by the commissioners last year. Now, what is the Game Commission in their own words? In their own words, they say, "It is our mission to manage and protect wildlife and their habitats while promoting hunting and trapping for current and future generations." What is the Game Commission in law? Well, the law being Title 34, known as Game, notes, "It shall be the duty of the Commission to protect, propagate, manage, and preserve the game or wildlife of this Commonwealth and to enforce, by proper actions and proceedings, the laws of this Commonwealth relating thereto." Now, it was only in 1996 that an amendment was added to encourage the Game Commission to support serving the interests of sportsmen. just important.
That's very important, guys. I wanted to make sure that that got outlined because that truly is to be the mission of the Game Commission and or the Fish Commission, but it's specifically the Game Commission.
Now, what is the Fish and Boat Commission? They were established back in 1866 with really one sole focus, and that focus in 1866 was on the American shad, which was in great decline. Since then, their responsibilities have greatly expanded. Modern responsibilities include managing boats, waterways, fish hatcheries. They actually oversee reptiles, amphibians, and all the properties used for fishing and recreational boating. Some of the key functions would be regulation and enforcement, which are fishing methods, bag limits, boating laws, life preservers, DUIs, registration. Education and outreach. They teach people about fishing and aquatic wildlife, provide opportunities for fishing and aquatic recreation. And resource management. They ensure that there are fish in the waters, docks to fish and boat from, and adequate facilities to support anglers and boaters.
Now, I want to stop them right there for a second. I think you'll find this very, very interesting. 2/3 of Pennsylvania's waterways would not have trout in it if we didn't stock them. 2/3. That's a massive amount of water that, in all reality, needs help. So, thank you.
And I will note, having heard this from the Fish and Boat Commission, they do not mind people following their stocking trucks. The people who follow their stocking trucks are the people who are paying their license fees, and they're all for it. Now, what is the Fish and Boat Commission in their own words? Well, it is their mission to protect, conserve, and enhance the Commonwealth's aquatic resources and provide fishing and boating opportunities. What does the law say? The law being Title 30, known as Fish. The Commission shall administer and enforce this title and other laws of this Commonwealth relating to the encouragement, promotion, and development of the fishery interests, the protection, propagation, and distribution of fish, the management of boating and the operation of boats, and the encouragement, promotion, and development of recreational boating. So now we've gone through that. We know what the Game Commission is, we know what the Fish and Boat Commission is, and what they're tasked with via law and through their own words. But who are the commissioners? What exactly is a commissioner? A commissioner is an appointee. The process is that there's the Governor's Advisory Council. This is a council of advisors to the governor. They are nameless, faceless. We don't really know who all these people are, but they interview potential commissioners and determine if they would be good for the job. They then suggest that person to the governor. That the governor chooses a person who then needs to be confirmed by a majority vote of the Senate. I think it's important to note that the House plays no role and the general public plays no role. It's the governor's choice confirmed by the Senate.
And I want to stop them right there because this is great sort of commentary interaction for me because it's difficult to go back sometimes to some of the other points. I want you to look at that slide right there, and I want you to think about how many times you have heard people say, keep politics out of game and fish management. Are you kidding me? It's all political. It is 100% political. And now let me just tell you something. See how that says confirmed by the Senate? How this actually works? As Griffin said, you don't even know who that advisory council is. It's hard for me to even get an answer from the governor's office or that advisory council as to who they even are. Okay? Now, let's just say you're a senator, or even a House member for that matter, has a little bit of influence, or you have a suggestion. And you got a friend who wants to be a commissioner. You make that known. That ends up at the advisory council, which then makes a deal with the governor and the Senate. And that person finds their way, even though 12 people may have applied in an official capacity with an application. For instance, one said senator who was no longer with us, he had an insurance agent who gave him quite a few bits of campaign contributions, which was fine, but he ended up being a commissioner. That is why I tell you that. Second of all, there's one in place right now who actually doesn't represent far from where we're here. his wife and Governor Tom Wolf's wife played pinochle together. Very important. Very important. That's how he is a commissioner. Now, I know I can be somewhat sharp, but I want you to understand this is a serious matter. And this is why I've been very frustrated as a sportsman and as a legislator, because there's the difference between perception and reality. And this is why I think this is very important that people understand this. And I'm going to also say, which I would have said later tonight, but I'm going to say it now, I represent PA in the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus. That's national. I get to rub shoulders with state reps and senators all over the country. If I can make it to the convention, which is very difficult because of the time of year it is, I missed the one in Montana. Thanks, Carl. You'll have to make up for that. And the last one I was at was just in Delaware. I was down in Arkansas. I was at a few of these. But I want to tell you something that I know this is recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. The number one issue nationwide for the sportsmen is the infiltration of anti-hunters in the departments. Now, just dissect that for a little bit and think about the things that you have seen and heard and experienced. Anti-hunters who have become part of a deep-stated agency that are unelected, remember politics, and they are deeply rooted, which on the federal level we have Doge trying to clean out. So, continue.
Thank you, Chairman. So they're appointees by the governor. They are regulators. They take what is in Title 30, fish, and Title 34, game. They take the very broad law and turn that into the regulations we have come to know and love. They are volunteers. They're often retirees. They're unpaid for their positions, and they serve 4-year terms, a maximum of 3 consecutive terms. They are a vote. Each commissioner gets 1 vote for their respective commission. A game commissioner votes for the game commission. Fish and boat commissioner votes for the fish and boat commission. And they are representative. At the end of the day, the commissioner for this region should represent the interests of this region. Oh.
So that brings me to this map, which I think is done very well by Griffin, and you're going to see why. But there was something I've been struggling with for a long time as being a legislator with the things that I just shared with you, the things that have already been shared. And I did just release this week the new piece of legislation as to why I think this is a great time to bring it up.
And we will get into that.
And we'll get into it. But I want to make sure that you know why the things that I've already said are very important to get to. The legislation that I have proposed is that sportsmen would elect their commissioner. Sportsmen would elect their commissioner. That was presented to me one day at a sportsman's event with a couple other elected officials nearby. And the question that was asked me was, hey, Rep, how comes we can't have any input to who the commissioners are? I said, it's a good, awesome question. What I need to do is dig into the legalese, if you will, and the process as to how this takes place, which brings us to this day. That is why, and I want to share with you, look, I don't hold much back, because I think you need to know. Because I've had a lot of questions in my whole life about certain things that nobody would give me answers to, okay? The governor, the Senate, the advisory council, and the deep state of people who are committed to being part of that network are totally against sportsmen electing their commissioner. Just let that sink in. They don't want you to have a voice. But look, I fight the best that I can. I put out forward what I can. Facts matter. And I think when you see that region right there now, those are the 9 regions. And go ahead, Griffin.
So there's 9 regions, 9 game commission commissioners. Each commissioner represents a region. We're in Lancaster County, correct?
Yes.
So that is PGC Region 6. Does anyone know who your game commission commissioner is for this region?
Wow.
Yeah, that's
I wonder why.
that's commonplace. Your commissioner is for District 6 is Michael Mitrick.
His wife knows how to play pinochle, by the way.
He is a hunter. They are all hunters and fishermen. Michael Mitrick, I believe, historically was a pheasant hunter. I will note that he does not come from Pennsylvania. I believe he comes from Illinois. He lives in
You better
Pennsylvania.
quit while you're ahead, Griffin.
I'm sorry. He lives in Pennsylvania now, but I don't need to go into the details of every commissioner. The Fish and Boat Commission. There are 10 commissioners. 8 represent regions, and 2 are at-large. The at-large commissioners are purely for boating interests. Does anyone know who your Fish and Boat Commissioner is? Okay. It is Robert B.J. Small. And your at-large commissioners are Charlie Charlesworth and Richard Lewis. So now we've gone through what are the commissions, who are the commissioners, and it's time to get into the meat. What are some of our concerns? Hunting and trapping general concerns. The integrity of the game fund. Now, what do we mean by that? The game fund is separate from the general fund. It is supported by you, the sportsmen, and it's loaded right now. There is $500 million in the fund, and when legislators and the general public see that they have all this money, they think, well, maybe we could use a little bit of that, and we need to be sure that that money is used for the sportsmen and for wildlife and our environment. The chairman has many game concerns with the Game Commission and ethical violations. There's quite a list. I have a document back there that goes into a little bit more of the details. But, you know, their past executive director had to resign. They have possibly mismanaged some of their oil and gas leases. There's quite a list. And it's not as transparent as other state agencies because it's an independent commission, but they don't have to be not transparent.
Now, I want to stop right there because I think it's, again, important to know my comments with respect to what Griffin said. Many of you don't know what my background is, and I get that. But I just want to let you know, I've been hunting. I'm old enough. I'm 64 years old. So I was 12. We could not do that. We didn't have a mentoring program. So as Tim and some of us got to 12, that was our first opportunity. Now, we could tag along, but typically it was very taboo, but you had to wait till you were 12, okay? So from the age of 12, it was kind of like when I was waiting to get my driver's license. Back in that day, I took my driver's test the day I turned 16. You can't do that today, but I did. That was legal, and I was ready. Well, when I was 12, I was ready to go hunt. And that was a lot about what we did. We hunted, we trapped. I had a raccoon as a pet. I raised it from the time it was a couple weeks old.
That is illegal. You can't you can't do that. Just if anyone has any ideas.
I brought him. I don't know why. Anyway, we had a live fox in the backyard. Many people
Also
knew
can't
we
do that.
had it, and my dad trapped it. And I'm going to give you the story behind that because I think it's very important. As
It's only illegal if you get caught with
there
it,
you
right?
go.
Yes.
You don't get caught or nothing.
Well, the funny thing about it is the local game people knew who my dad was. My dad was a pastor. My dad was raised in an orphanage in West Philadelphia. My dad was left fatherless on the streets of Philadelphia at 4 years old. And through the outreach of kids and the YMCA, adults, and the church, my dad was given a trip to Montgomery County. And from Montgomery County, my dad realized that there was a new world out there. And from that whole entire experience, he ended up with 5 kids, 3 boys and 2 girls that all were outdoor people. He taught us whatever he could because you got to remember, he was not mentored. Now, all of this stuff comes back to me, and which is why I think it's very important that we plant the seed and we understand that there are real-life experiences that have a benefit, okay? He named that fox that we had in the pen Herod. You know why? Herod was the sly fox that the Lord labeled in the scripture because of how vicious he was. That fox killed 55 chickens in one night and 20 ducks the next. Because fox will kill for the sake of killing. And when you learn a lot of the nature of animals, you understand that they have certain tendencies. There's only really two things that drive wildlife: their belly and reproduction. It's not really deep science. And when you understand some of those things, and as a child and you're growing up and you're learning these things and you're experiencing it, it was life-changing to a lot of us, okay? When you look at some of the things of the game fund, the reason the game fund is important to guys like us is because it's not taxpayer funded. Very, very important. I don't ever want that to change, but I also want them to have the sense to know that you don't squander it. There are a lot of things I could say about the way the money is spent. We get that annual report every year. We got to go through that. You get only told what they want you to know. You got to dig into it deeper. There's a lot of different things that have to do with that. But a guy like me knew that money was coming from the oil and gas money. And years ago, and wasn't that many years ago, when they came to us and said we need a fee increase, I questioned them. I said, there's money coming. Why are you spending money here? Why are you spending money there? Which is why you now have somebody like Donald Trump who is rooting out all the waste, okay? For me, that happened a long time ago, because when you work for yourself and you write and sign the front of a paycheck, you understand that there's no freebies. And so for me, I don't want that game fund to be violated, because once you let people be able to tap into that, that's gone. You know as well as I do that would be gone. So when the Senate proposed last session to take $150 million out of the game fund to give the Chesapeake Bay type clean and streams grants, I threw a fit. Now, I'm one guy, but I'm going to give you the story as to what took place. This is what took place. I couldn't sleep. I was irritated with the fact that my colleagues just think somebody else's money over there is for their spending. And so I started to do a little bit of research, and I found out, of all things, only in 2021, then Governor Wolf and his administration wanted to take money out of DCNR, which is the state park system. That is state funded. That's taxpayer funded. If that's taxpayer funded and it got forced into the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and the Supreme Court said, hands off, you can't just go in there and take that money, give it back. That gave me ammunition. And when I put a press release together, my press man's right there, he can tell you how it happened. When I put that press release together and threw it out there, this is what's ironic about it. Every environmental group and every special interest group that saw that press release was like, oh yeah, you can't take that money. Hands off. And they start calling their representatives and their senators and saying, yeah, you can't take that money. I know a certain senator that called my legal department and asked them, how can Maloney do that? And they said, well, because he's right. That's the simplest way we can answer you, because you can't take that money. So that money got saved. I always have to be careful, because I always think there's a crafty way later that they find out how to take the money anyway, which in my mind is the Game Commission coming up with some brainstorm of a way to appease people by saying, oh, well, we're going to create this grant, so on and so forth, okay? Some of those things could be good, but just remember, that cash cow doesn't have an endless supply of money. It's like milking a cow too many times a day. It eventually dries up. And so I think that's very important for you to understand. The reason the pheasant farms are up there, do you guys understand what the last two executive directors of the Game Commission did? They closed them. They closed them. Now, I want you to understand something. We have had Pennsylvania-specific DNA raised pheasants. Now, we all know the DDT and farming practices and all those things played into a challenge with the pheasants. However, we still had DNA that was Pennsylvania specific to our pheasants. So after 2 were closed, the last executive director decided we're just going to go out to third party, we're going to buy pheasants from somebody else, and we're going to close the last 2. Every one of those birds that was released was the last of the Pennsylvania DNA. It's all gone. It's all gone. So you can go back a couple slides here and figure out what happened to that mission, where's the conviction, why do they do these things? And I think you as sportsmen, we as sportsmen have the right to know, and you have the right to try to figure out why are these people making these decisions. It gets a little worse because those properties had grant money on them, otherwise known as, the other one.
Pittman Robinson.
No. They had some Pittman Robertson, but they had other ones were the other green, yeah. Anyway, that actually had a grant program on it. Well, when you take that money and you utilize it, there's certain strings attached. And one of them is a 10-year period of time. You can't do anything that's against that, and you have to be hands-off. So as I know it right now, a couple of those pheasant farms are sitting abandoned, empty, because they're waiting for that time period to end so they then can go in and do whatever they want. Now, these are decisions, folks, that I have nothing to do with, you have nothing to do with, any of us up here have nothing to do with. This is historical issues that are being made and decisions being made by this agency. That's why it says that up there, okay? You probably heard there was an issue that blew up when the Senate found out that a former senator, his lobbying firm was hired for $10,000 a month to be the Game Commission lobbyist. By the way, that was the guy whose insurance agent ended up being the commissioner. Did I mention that earlier? Anyway, those are why the internal culture to me are so problematic. We had the game wardens come into a meeting in front of the commissioners and explain how toxic it was to work for the commission. That was done in the public. That was done out for everybody to see it. Those people came to me and others. And I want to say, because I know this is being broadcast, there are other issues out there waiting to pop up. There are people who have been targeted. There are people who have been treated very wrong. That's the culture that came out of their own game wardens' mouths. And I want you to know that I probably would be the strongest guy in their corner if it weren't for the fact that there's so many issues. I, to this day, am still a pest control agent. You know, I've been trapping for a long, long time. And I still hold my license because I like to keep that going, mostly because if somebody calls me and said, Dave, I got a problem, I like to do it as a sort of a public service. Got a raccoon in their attic, they got whatever issue they have, skunk under the shed. And I like that. I like to be able to continue to help people in that manner. So this isn't foreign to me. I knew most of these game commissioners and people in the agency long before the present employees are even in place. Now, I just want you to think about that. That's how far back some of our history can go, because we were raised through this process, knowing these people. And that is why those internal culture, those bullet points are up there, because there is a history. And I know it's a little lengthy, but you needed to hear it.
And there's supplemental information for that in the back if you'd like to look into it further for yourself. Wildlife and habitat management is also a general concern of ours. Game lands are constantly increasing, but there must still be a strong focus on food plots and good game habitat. Owning the land and stopping construction really isn't enough to develop healthy habitat. And chronic wasting disease. The concern with this is it's been around for 50 years. We've been doing the same thing for 50 years. It continues to spread. It is a serious liability to Pennsylvania's elk herd, and perhaps alternatives need to be entertained. Fishing and boating general concerns. These are more limited concerns. Namely, the Fish and Boat Commission has rather limited funds, especially as compared to the Game Commission. The Fish Fund and Boat Fund, they just can't keep it as stocked as the Game Commission. They don't have the oil and gas revenue that the Game Commission has. And the liability is that they, at some point, may need to rely on the general fund, or at least ask for some general fund tax dollars. We don't want that. We can't intermingle these funds.
The only thing we did do in Act 89 back in the day, I forget what year that was now. Dave, you don't remember what, I think that might have been before you. Yeah. So Act 89 was that massive gas tax that took place. I sort of emphasize massive because we're, what, the second highest in the country? But the reason I bring that up is because the legitimate side of that fund is that any gasoline and oil, mostly gasoline, that was purchased for boats didn't make its way back to the Fish Commission. So in all fairness, there was a value there that was done, that the amendment that went on that gave opportunity for some of that tax to go to the Fish Fund because that was actually being used for boats and that such of watercraft. So I thought you'd like to know that because there is a piece of that in some reality comes from the people in general back to the fund.
The Fish and Boat Commission does have some influence on the Department of Environmental Protection and their regulations. This isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but when they classify a stream as high value for different aquatic species, that then snowballs into new DEP regulations, which can then unduly harm local businesses. This is a tricky issue, but the real concern is that business and wildlife and our concern for both need to strike a balance.
And I will tell you that my first piece of legislation as a legislator, which hangs in my office, very few people even know how bad the circumstance was. But I learned about it being in the trades and learned about it in the fact that if you tried to geographically in different places of the state subdivide your property, you were required through the DEP to do something that was called an anti-degradation analysis. It was so non-scientific. It was so unconstitutional. It was so random. But I want to tell you how it started. It started with the classification of those streams. So if you had an exceptional value stream or a high value stream, you became classified as where you geographically were. And in my case, with pristine soil that was on-lot septic systems, you couldn't subdivide your property unless you could prove that your nitrogen, i.e. waste, wasn't going to pollute a stream 5 miles away. That's the reality of what took place. So fortunately, when I came in, it was Tom Corbett. We had a situation with a changeover in DEP secretary. The man who got in place then was very useful, and my bill became so significant that by the time the left tried to file suit against it, the AG was Kathleen Kane. I don't have to tell you what kind of mess that became. So fortunately for us as Pennsylvania residents, a piece of regulation that may have a good intent can have unintended consequences somewhere else. And I just had to tell you that because it's very important to understand that there's a overlap sometimes with some of the issues.
Another concern is license fees, and the concern isn't that the Fish and Boat Commission has any immediate plans to raise license fees. The law does allow them to assess their own license fees for the next 10 years. The Game Commission does not have this authority, but also, with the previously noted limited funds, there's a bit of liability there that the Fish and Boat Commission may raise their license fees. They have promised not to.
And what did we do? So we put a continuing resolution in there that the House and or the Senate can put in a resolution that says we don't like the increase of your fee. We made sure this happened because we thought it was good accountability. And then we could stop that fee increase. So we did actually add that into the legislation. Now, folks, this is something that I don't believe you're going to be ready for. We're going to have a barcode, right? Yep. So that will allow you to see this full video in your own time. Take it, do whatever, spread it to everybody you know, whatever. But I really want you to be ready for something that I don't think you have ever heard. And there are a lot of people, I've been contacted by legislators across the country because of this video. And I really want you to pay attention. It's simple, but it is really, really enlightening. So here we go.
They tell us it's infectious. They tell us it's the killer of deer. They tell us it's 100% fatal. They tell us that if we feed the deer, we are spreading it. They tell us it's from prions and they are everywhere. They tell us they are trying to stop the spread. They tell us they need our hunter-harvested deer to test for it. They use broken science. They have no answers after 57 years, yet they tell us we are on the verge of an epidemic. The agency's own document, the AFWA, contradicts what they restrict. Evidence to date suggests that restrictions on feeding quantity would not mitigate the potential for disease transmission, and that putative mitigating practices such as spreading feed or bait over a specified area or restricting the kinds of food items that can be used did not substantially reduce the potential risk for disease transmission. The narrative began in 1967. The one piece that is in agreement is CWD is a neurological degenerative disease that is focused on the brain and spinal cord. The rest of the narrative is filled with confusion, doubt, fear, power, and funds. Millions of dollars has been spent on research, restrictions, slaughtering, propaganda, and testing, while EHD and Winters have killed tens of thousands. Where is the money coming from? There's a simple response: the people. Whether it is from the Pittman-Robertson funds, legislation, or license fees, it is the people. Recently, Federal Bill 5608, CWD Research and Management, was passed in the House with suspended rules and sent to the Senate, where it sat with no action taken for 8 months. The bill was then picked up in the Omnibus Bill, H.R. 2167, in December of 2022. $70 million a year for 6 years, equally $420 million. The bulk of the bill reads that state agencies and tribes can get a crack at millions as long as they follow a certain criteria in which the agencies wrote. New areas of detections, more funds. Strict management, more funds. More detections, more funds. Commitment of funds, more funds. There were many agencies and groups that lobbied or donated to the passing of the bill. Suddenly, an uptick in meetings, slaughtering, testing, and propaganda began across the nation. We aren't seeing the death. Where are all the dead deer they are telling us is happening by CWD? Testing, 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 testing.
Curious to see the rest of the video, I can provide the QR code at the end of today's conversation.
Yes, and so folks, this is why it's extremely important for us to understand that there could be other things at play. Look, I love to hear it from somebody else's mouth. That man, the history of that man is all over the world. The amount of animal science that he did in Africa is staggering. That man forgot more than any game commission biologist, no offense, will ever learn. And my only point is this: we don't have an answer. But you know what he also says? There is no such thing as a prion. That's what he says. He's the scientist. He says there's no such thing as a prion. All you're going to show me is squiggly lines. And that bothers me because you and I are trusting and we're looking at something for the future and we're wondering about what's going on. So the deer farmers of America, and especially of Pennsylvania, have spent millions of dollars genetically modifying and or breeding CWD-resistant deer. I made a suggestion. Of course, the Game Commission didn't like it. I said, why don't you take the enclosures? Why don't you let some of our wild deer get into the enclosure? Put a couple of the deer farmers' proven buck in there, let them breed, put them back out into the wild, and at least you can start the process. This is what I'm going to say boldly. Some of you in here may not like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't believe that the Game Commission wants a cure. That's my suspicion, because as every other legislator across this country has come to me, they've said, we don't know what this is. Is it a bacteria? Remember the scientist from Louisiana that came up with the bacteria theory, and a Pennsylvania scientist agreed with him. So what do? You mock the man, you defame him, you do all these things because his narrative doesn't fit yours. And here's what I always said. You don't have the answer, so why would you attack somebody that is trying to help? Which I'm going to come to something here that the farmers aren't going to really like. But I'm reading a book right now, and it has a whole pile of references. And this is the book I'm reading. I'm almost done. It's not hard reading. Got some really long scientific words in it because they're all about, disease and things like that. But the reason I think this is important is because maybe there's something that we're either ignoring, not wanting to hear, or we're accepting. This is about glyphosate. And I know sitting in Lancaster County, amongst farmers, you all know what Roundup is. That's what this book is about. My only reason for bringing it up is the fact that what if this is affecting the physical condition of the deer, which comes back to the more resistant deer that are being bred against the resistance, which only in my mind makes it a little bit stronger to the theory that there's something being missed here. This book goes on to say about the things that we know as humans are affecting us because of glyphosate. Now, just in case you don't know who this person is, this is Rachel Carson, who the big building in Harrisburg on Market Street is named after. She's the woman that exposed DDT. She's the one they made a sort of an iconic figure because she exposed DDT and what it did to our wildlife and our soil. So I only bring that up because, look, I got bees. You want to know what's the biggest issue amongst the beekeepers? Glyphosate. Because the bees fly to people's yards or to a field where it's freshly sprayed, they bring it back to the hive, and they're dead. I'm only going by the things that we're learning and the things that are being difficult to try to work around. So that's why I think it's important to have the conversation. I don't have the answers. I don't want to be a biologist. I don't want to be a scientist. I've lived too much of a wonderful, blessed life. I don't want to go backwards and go try to learn something else. But what I don't like is bad information. And I think it's important to know that that video showed a bunch of things that I think you can get to and watch. But now I'm going to just quickly read off before I open up to any other kind of specific questions. But I'm going to read off some of the things that you can go and look up your own self about special interest groups that you and I may be a part of. But just to give you an idea of the interaction. National Wild Turkey Federation, $15,207,000 from the federal government. Trout Unlimited, $230 million. Ducks Unlimited, $373 million. Pheasants Forever, $152 million. Nature Conservancy, $567 million. Penn State for mushrooms, $3.7 million. Just thought I'd throw that one in. National Deer Association, $4.4 million. Does that group recognize any of you? There's a certain commissioner who came from that alliance and is now a state commissioner, game commissioner. That's that alliance. $4.4 million. Rough Grouse Society, $6.3 million. Now, I say that to you. You can get that on datarepublican.com. And what's the other one, Charlie? Spend USA or something? USAspending.com. They have only just been recently released because of people like Elon Musk and so on. And those are things that you can come with your own sort of relaxation in your own home, get on your computer and look it up. I just quickly did that in half an hour.
Sorry, USAspending.gov.
USAspending.gov. That's the other site. So all of these pieces are in there, okay? And I only bring those things up because what I really believe is important is that we stay mission-focused and that we stay in our lane. And I don't believe that some of these groups have stayed in their lane. That was why I exposed the trip to the National Turkey Federation convention by the Game Commission, who took 33 employees. They left their post, and they spent $73,000 of your money to go to that convention. Okay? I think it's important that you have the facts. So I'm going to stop right there because I know there could be a lot of other information shared along with any questioning, and maybe we'll look at that list.
Yeah. Let's open it up to the meat of today's conversation, and that is the open conversation. Beginning with Ken Whitmer, if you could come up to the microphone. I believe you need to turn the microphone on. I can assist with that. And Ken is going to discuss public land access and some concerns he has with the commissions.
I'm not sure where the switch is.
You can just talk into it. Just get close enough.
Yeah, okay. Well, I filled out that paper before I heard your presentation, and I want to thank you for all the information that's still being mulled over in my head. The public land access, I used to be an avid deer hunter before I had to hang it up. And one of my methods was I would see where the mass crops were in the fall, and that's usually where the deer were. And then I'd go spring turkey hunting. I wasn't really hunting turkeys, I was hunting deer. But now I have to walk 5 miles just to get to the starting point where we park, just to get back into the place where I want to do my scouting in turkey season. And I realized that the amount of trash being dumped on the game lands has gone way down. So I understand the good side of it, but the other side is I can't walk that far anymore. And the other thing, I worked for 50 plus years in a woodworking factory, and one of the things that they required before they would hire you or anybody else was, can you read a tape measure? These same people who were sitting and controlling our game, our hunting, really one of the things that they do, the ones who are against us are also trying to take our guns away too. And I would say the minimum, if you got to read a tape measure to work in a wood shop, you ought to be forced to hunt to be on the game commission. So, thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I will also tell you that a piece of my legislation has the requirement that we can quickly read, to your point, would be that those individuals that want to call themselves our representative would have that background. So there is a piece of that that's very important. I thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, go ahead.
And I want to touch on, you mentioned accessibility. Someone who I can get out and walk. I'm a lot younger than you, but one day I'm going to be in your situation. It never crossed my mind. I had a gentleman come up to me about 2-3 months ago, and he said, "Hey, listen, I got a problem. Been hunting the state game lands all my life. I can't get there anymore. They got the gates locked down. What do you think about doing something to get the gates open, get us access back there and into the woods?" And when you look, sportsmen are leaving the woods. Part of it is access. What are we hurting by letting folks go back in there? There's no one going back in there now. What are we really hurting with it? And I think at some point you got to do trial and error, right? If we let sportsmen in there, whether you want to buy a permit for $150 and take a side-by-side back there, we're going to trust you're going to be a good steward and respect the land. However, if you act up, you're going to be walking back there those 5 miles. And I just think that we've got to get outside the box a little bit here if we want to make this work.
Well, I'll also say that from my history and experience, there was always a rotation of time which was around certain hunting seasons that those gates were open. But I will tell you that I have noticed and know that many of those gates no longer get opened. So to your point is exactly right. But there was a time where hunting season came, whether it was grouse, turkey, pheasant, deer seed, whatever, and those gates were open. So I do think that has to be revisited. I thank you for your question.
Thank you. Paul Means, if you could come up. You wanted to discuss wildlife management, game lands, encouraging more hunters and anglers, raising the voices of sportsmen, and you had some concerns with the commissions. Oh, Paul?
He heard that blue pill. He's not getting up.
And what was the question again? Or what?
I think you raised some of these concerns on this paper.
Yes. Well, one of them, like you said, was the access, and the other part, there's so many areas that, say up in Tioga County, where like 4,000 acres, and there might be 2,000 acres you can't even get to unless you have to walk in. And I'm like the other guy who was up here, at one time I could do that. Now I can't do that. So what can we do to change a lot of that?
Yeah.
As far as the game license increase or whatever that you had on that paper there, to me, we need to support these people that are involved with the game laws. So we got to pay the money to have things the way we would like it to be. I mean, everybody has their opinion about different things, and the way the structure is now, they're probably underfunded, most of them. I mean, you check with some of these other states, they probably get more money than what our game commissioner people do. Whether right or wrong, I don't know, but I think it should be more in check with the other states to what they have.
Well, it's a good point. I just want to give you a couple things which may may put you at rest a little bit. I actually had the piece of legislation to bring the warden's salary up, okay? The commissioners didn't want to hear it. So I actually have a piece of legislation that would give them either a one-time fix or bring them up to, say, the standard of state police. Whatever that balance could have been made. I actually agree with you 100% that we should be able to have folks compensated for a good living and so on. Money's not an issue, as was said earlier. The Game Commission is sitting on $500 million. Now, like I said before, you can't just keep taking and then think that pot is going to keep coming. There are oil and gas issues about how you keep that money coming. But I've actually proposed that because I do believe a servant's worthy of his hire, and I do believe he should be compensated. But there is a bigger piece to the Game Commission itself. I did know how many employees that was. I used to have that number, and I can't tell you what that is, but there is amount of compensation that these folks do get, you know, besides their pension and their benefits and so on.
Well, I know just a couple years ago they were saying they were going to close down Middle Creek up here because they didn't have the funding. Well, ever since this gas rights thing came about, that changed things dramatically. You don't hear anything.
Well,
about
that's
that
because
anymore.
they were telling you one thing, but the reality was something different.
I agree with 100%. So,
Yeah. I thank you for that. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Next up, we have Ivan Zimmerman. He wanted to discuss fishing regulations and special permits, along with elk tag licensing.
Ivan Zimmerman's my name. We have 60-some acres up in Cameron County, and we have elk there, and there's people all over the United States can apply for elk tags.
Look, I got to stop you right there. You're speaking to the choir, pal.
Okay.
I mean, I brought this up a long time ago. And, of course, they don't like it. But guess what now they're thinking? They're thinking because they got so much input that they want to limit it to a percentage.
Right.
And 10%. I will tell you that I'm so strong about this that we as Pennsylvanians should have priority. I have believed that from day one. I could go my whole entire life dreaming about a Pennsylvania elk and never get the opportunity. But somebody puts in for a tag, bango, from East Jabip in Wisconsin, and they come into Pennsylvania and they can hunt.
Yeah, and they didn't even have to buy a license.
Well, so that's part of the new provision.
Right.
The new provision is to buy a license and then limit it, but
What is the license fee? Do we know?
so
For someone out of state coming in and do that, did they have to buy?
so they wanted to raise that, but I think you're looking at about $125.
Yeah, right. It's not much compared to going to Montana or something
Correct.
like that.
So I also want to say this, and another good point to say this, something that I have been saying for a long time about the issues with respect to Pennsylvania. Although I'm a Pennsylvania guy, I 100% love Pennsylvania. We're the 33rd smallest state, I think it is, acreage-wise. We are the number one state to send hunters out of state. To your point, I think it's very important that we understand that because the other opportunities that are elsewhere, Pennsylvania sportsmen want to have a part of that, so they spend their money and resources to go out of state to hunt in other states. We're number one state for that issue. So it speaks a lot. That's why the outdoor show is in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg.
Right.
That's why the outfitters come to Pennsylvania, guys, because they know the Pennsylvania guys got some money. And they're going to spend some money to go somewhere. It may be their once and only time, but they're going to do it because they want an opportunity.
So there's a couple guides had asked already if they may hunt on our property, which we let them. And but I think, yeah, Pennsylvania residents as in general, but also landowners in the elk zones or residents in the elk zones should also have some sort of a priority, because, well, there's a game warden had asked if we would sign up with, what is it, there was something that you can sign up with, like, that they can let people, they can tell people,
Cooperative.
they can tell people they can hunt on your property.
Yeah, it's a cooperative.
He had wanted me to sign up with it, and I didn't, but I'd still let somebody if they ask for elk like that. Anyway, so that, I know that that's on the table right now. Another thing is, you were talking about children, and this is the Fish Commission. We were rattlesnake hunting, which I'm sure a lot of people in here don't agree with that, but it was my sons and grandchildren and somebody else and his children. So there was a bunch of children along. And the one boy was carrying the tube that we let rattlesnake go in to measure it. And 2 game wardens stopped us. It's the second time in my life of hunting that I got stopped by a game warden. So they said the children can't hunt. I mean, they can't carry anything along at all. They don't have license. We have to have a special permit. So they don't have to have a fishing license. I have to have a fishing license and a special permit. So we went to the Sportsman show and asked the Fish Commission there, and they had a 45-minute wait till they could give us information. And they said that, yeah, they can't. There's a special permit that you have to get with your issuing agent. So I asked our issuing agent, and they didn't know anything about it. So those children probably don't really like the game wardens because, and I'm not blaming the game warden but they told us that we need special permits, and there is none for the children because they don't even need a fishing license.
I think that's a problem. So I would agree with you. I'm glad this is being recorded, and I'm glad that we have sort of a documented question. And I know personally what I will do is I will inquire about sometimes, and I'm not going to speak for them, but sometimes there is a different answer you will get from different personnel, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And so I do think I'm believing consistency, so I would like to have that clarified. I think there is an issue where if you have your children with you and they're doing and participating, not so sure where that harm would be, besides the fact that if you don't offer a permit, then you sort of have another problem. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment they'd like to share?
Folks, I really enjoy this. I know there's so many things that I would love to, I could literally stay here all night. And I want to show you, just for optics again, in case you're wondering what this big black book is. This big black book is all the information, the 1,100 pages, as to the request of my right to know to the Game Commission on the Saturday versus the Monday opener. Right there. Now, there was an individual in the back here. I don't think he was real happy about some of the things that I was bringing out because I could see his facial expressions and he left. But the reason I bring this up, folks, is facts matter. And the Game Commission continues to lie about the Saturday opener. This is their own document. They sent it to me on a flash drive. I printed the whole entire thing out, and me and staff went through this, and it's 60+%. Do not change it from Monday. That is what the Sportsman said. But the Game Commission says the opposite. I think it's very important. That's why I brought it as optics, because there's the proof right there. Oh. Well, I told you I'd stay here all night if you wanted. But anyway, that's why that's here, folks. I really think it's important to know that facts do matter.
Is anything being done to that effect?
Pardon?
Is anything being
So, very good question. So there are legislative intents, but there is a political issue that took place, which is why we are how many years into this, and it hasn't been changed back. And this goes back to where I believe there are destructive people within the agency, and they're allowed to be influenced by other people. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you. There could be House members, there could be Senate members, and there could be special interest groups. If any of you were paying attention to the last, and look, by the way, there's handouts in the back here. I think you can take one with you that's extremely useful on this issue. This was done by residents of Pennsylvania concerned about the lie and concerned about the tradition and the heritage that's being affected. So to answer your question, there has been legislation for the last couple terms. The chairwoman in the House won't run the bill. The Senate's totally against it because they were part of changing it, to be perfectly frank with you. So it's a problem. But brings me back to, wouldn't you rather elect your own commissioner so that you could go to a commissioner and say, hey, how about you be the voice of the sportsmen, and this is what we think? So excellent timing. I'm glad you brought that up. But those are some of the things that are really front and center for the issue. So where we stand with drones, I don't want to speak too much to it because there's a lot of ignorance that I have with it, but I know that drones was discussed in a general sense several years ago in the legislature, and I'm going to say something that you probably aren't familiar with, and I don't have the proper terminology, but it has to do with boundaries of your property. So people started to ask the question of, where does your boundary line end, on the surface or in the air? So the way it came up, that is, your boundary line doesn't end going down to China, but going up, it's about this 500-foot sort of ceiling because of FAA. That's the best that I can tell you as far as the guideline. I know there's a lot of people who believe that if you're flying a drone on their land across their property, especially while they're out there, if they have the means, they're going to take it down. I don't believe that I'm going to give you the advice to, but I also would not give you the advice not to. How's that?
Don't get caught.
I mean, honestly, did you see that the court just threw out the one against the Game Commission? They just threw that case out. Now, that was a sting operation, I get it. But that also brings me to the point of the open fields doctrine, which we brought up earlier, which I'm totally against. It started in the Prohibition because they were looking for stills. But I don't believe anybody should have the right, I don't care what agency you are, to put a camera on my property and video me without my permission.
How it came up, a man from Pittsburgh fell, hurt his head, didn't realize how bad a shape he was in, drove up to my mom's place, which is in Sullivan County, and tried to go up a dirt road and got stuck in the truck. He fell in a ditch on the property. They found him there. I'm making a long story short. His son and his wife and his daughter came to my mom's house, and he asked permission to fly a drone on the property, see if they could find the truck. They did. They didn't find the truck at that time because it was buried in brush, but I couldn't believe all that they could see with this. So where I'm going, it is alarming.
So it is alarming, and I will also tell you this. There is an electronic piece within the game law that you're not to use to enhance your ability to take game, okay? I sort of think this qualifies. Hey, buddy, there's a bear coming, okay? So there is an issue there. However, I think when it comes to the drone sort of specific, I have a problem with fair chase. So you can say you're trying to recover a wounded deer. First of all, you don't know if it's down. And second of all, how do we know you're not going to disturb it because it's not dead? So there is a question. I get that. I really, truly do. I'm trying to be, from the question you asked me, where do we stand? I'm trying to look at this as what really would be fair chase, what would really be sort of moral, but also know that you could be down personally in the woods and they could fly a drone over top the woods and find you and save your life. So there's a place for tools. I had a brother-in-law that worked at Lockheed Martin. He told me a long, long time ago. He said we could have found that, what was that bomber called? The Unabomber. He said we could have found that Unabomber, but it wasn't worth us to change the satellites and all the money it would have cost to find that guy just because it was one person. So I do believe there's places for some of this stuff, but we sort of mix it a lot of times. Look, let's be honest. You could fly them drones at night. Tim's sitting right there. I brought it to his attention about a drone that was in the sky not far from his house. And this has been going on in my area for quite some time. It wasn't until it got brought up in New Jersey and some of the places on the coast that people realized that they were out there. I actually have a picture of my grandson and my son-in-law in my driveway with a deer on the back of the car, and you can see my flagpole, and behind the flagpole is a drone in the sky. So these things have been out there, but A, we don't really know what they are, but their clarity, to your point, is amazing because you could use it on so many different ways. I'm a fair chase kind of guy. I really am. I do believe in the sport, but I do believe in it being, earned, equitable. So I don't know where it'll necessarily go.
One other question, as far as private property, concerning someone's dog comes on your property, or they say, the first day a buck, unfortunately their dog got loose, they came on your property and they push out your honey hole. I mean, are they going to do anything about that?
So I'm the guy that brought that up. And the reason I brought it up was it had a good intention, okay? It had a very good intention. And the good intention was that you would be out rabbit hunting or grouse hunting with your dog if you was trained enough to do that, and it would get astray, maybe get on a hot trail, and it would go over to Susie's place, and you would go retrieve it. And the idea was back then, I remember when this discussion came up, that you would stick your shotgun at the tree or you'd mark it, whatever. You'd go in there and you'd say, hey, Rover, get over here, whatever you had to do when you get your dog. The idea was you couldn't be prosecuted for retrieving your dog. But what did it turn into? An all-out assault on the rights of your property. That's what it turned into. And to the people from all over the country who contacted me, who were the dog hunters and stuff, I said, look, you think I'm against you guys? Like, I'm in your corner. But you don't have the right to run your dogs on my land and say you're looking for a dog, because that's what they did. I actually have game wardens that came to me and said if it wasn't for somebody's camera and them walking by and giving them the bird in the camera, they said, we can do this and you can't stop us. And so it was him with that data that he was able to go to the judge and say, look, there's bad intent here. And so you're exactly right. This is what I said to people. I said, look, all you have to do is say you're looking for your dog. And you run ripshot all over someone's private property. You chase all the deer out of their sanctuary, all the game, you do whatever. Because you say, I'm looking for my... And by the way, nothing says that you can't be recording it and casing all the barns and the buildings for doing something later. Right? That's real. That's why I think a good intent turned awry. I don't agree with it. We wanted it taken out. They didn't take it out. But guess who wanted it? Guess who fought for that? They should stay in their lane and stay out of it. The Farm Bureau. Just thought you'd like to know that.
Just for a little bit of legislative insight on the drone issue, there is a Senate bill that would legalize the use of drones to retrieve downed game. You would need a license to use the drone, or you could use the services of a licensed drone operator. That's to retrieve downed game.
Again, how would you know they're down? See what I mean? That's why it becomes a problem.
And in regard to the Saturday versus Monday issue, in the House, there's House Bill 70 by Representative Brian Smith. He's on the Game and Fisheries Committee. We held an informational meeting on the issue, and I believe the major takeaway is that this is not an issue of game management. This is an issue of culture and economics, and it's in the purview of the legislature to act on that regard. There is a similar bill in the Senate being offered, I can't recall by who, but a Senate Democrat.
Boscola.
So there's a Senate bill, there's a House bill to move it back to Monday after Thanksgiving in statute it has a chance. Any other questions or comments?
But I would encourage you all, to whomever you need to talk to, whomever you feel the passion to talk to, that you need to do it, because there was a statistic that bothered me from a standpoint of who we are as sportsmen that showed that many and most sportsmen did not get engaged politically or with respect to these issues. And so their idea, meaning my colleagues and others, is I don't hear from them, so it doesn't matter. Yes, sir.
Cell cameras on state game lands, they're basically polluting our forests.
Do we actually have this statutory regulation to that? Do we know? So, actually, a representative called me this afternoon. That's Joe Emmerich from Northampton, and he has a piece of legislation that just basically makes it a criminal act with respect to stealing them anywhere. But that becomes difficult too, because how do you, I don't want to get into the whole thing about approving and all that stuff. But I actually don't know if the Game Commission has a regulatory outline of the do's and don'ts of you putting your private camera on their land.
We had asked them and they hadn't had any
Yeah.
regulations to,
Yeah.
tree stands have to be marked. Why shouldn't shell cameras?
Yeah.
And why can they be up 3 or 4 years in a row without being attended to?
Yeah, and I agree with, I agree with, I just didn't know what the actual verbiage was, but I do believe and do agree that that's a problem. There's actually people, I don't know if you actually realize the issue with privacy. You know, when you're on public land and you're being videoed, that's a privacy issue, because you weren't asked. You weren't asked. So there's an issue there with how it may or may not stand up in a court of law if somebody wants to use it against you. On your private property, to me, it's sacred, it's holy, and people should respect it. When it comes to public land, there's always a little bit of a gray area, and you bring up a good point, because I don't believe that it should be scattered with all these cameras. But there's also the other issue about, this sounds crude, but you could be found in a very inappropriate situation because you don't know a camera's there.
Right, and that's the thing. They should be at least marked with a band or something on the tree that they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good note. I appreciate that.
In my brief research in that 1 minute there, the camera itself needs to be marked, but I don't think you need a band around the tree or anything. It's perhaps your name and identification needs to be on the back of the camera.
Well, at this point, they don't have.
That's my general understanding.
Yeah, and I don't think it's again. I think we need to get that clarified, because that's why nothing comes on my mind about what's in statute or regulation. Good question.
We'll get some clarity there.
Yes, Tom.
Is anything being done to the effect of changing the way the commissioners get to that spot?
Well, that
As
is.
far as being elected?
That is why my legislation, I think, is so important. I have a copy of it. I'll give it to you personally if you want it, and I can provide it for anybody else. But absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the reasons why I thought it was very important to bring up the idea of the perception versus the reality of politics. Politics comes from the word policy. Is it good policy? Is it bad policy? And the fact of the matter is, if you want to be represented in this entire country, the representation takes place in the ballot box, except for game commissioners and fish commissioners. So I think it's time that it's changed, and I think if somebody wants to add to the language that I've worked on for several years now, I welcome any sort of input to it. But I've tried to be as open as possible and basically take it out of that political makeup, which you almost can entirely, because what we came up with is we would have several choices within that region of the commissioner, and then those choices would go to the governor, and he gets to pick out of the choices. But at least the choices were made by the sportsmen.
The chairman's bill was filed yesterday and should be able to be viewed online by next week.
And it has a number.
I don't recall it.
Yeah, it's 476 or something. Anyway, believe me, certain groups will not like it, so they'll make sure they know that you know what it is.
I would just say that one other point about the electing your own commissioners, if you don't like what the Senate and the House is doing or not doing, the commissioners can decide whatever they want to do. They have the ability to do it Monday or Saturday if they want. So the easiest way to get back to what you want, if that's what you want, would be the commissioners. Because the Senate's never going to go back. They've been walled off. The governor does what he's told.
So that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is sort of the dynamic that takes place, and it's very frustrating because at the end of the day, we are really kind of the only group of people that I can think of that don't really get a voice, although we're supposed to have an elected official. So I think it's important that this conversation is finally out in front of us, and I appreciate being able to do it, because it was never really something that was able to be done in the past, because you're actually sitting in the very first meeting like this that's ever happened in Pennsylvania. So I appreciate everybody that came. I'm going to try to hopefully put forward where the next one would be, and I believe I can tell you that March 12th in Clarion, Pennsylvania will be the next one, and we will have a location for that and a time. I hope to do all of them at like 6 p.m. because, look, sportsmen work or whatever. I don't want to do something at 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't think it's practical. So my point is to do this, and then by the next or so meeting, we would have the following one set up, because we have to have the audio guys, the video, all the different things to be able to organize it to make it continue. So again, stay in touch if you have any questions. Anything else comes up that you want to know about, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I really appreciate, you can always tell when a guy talks from Western Pennsylvania, he sounds a little different than the guys from the East. Just like the Pennsylvania Dutch now won't, okay? You guys know what I'm saying.
So Dave, I think what you should do is have another meeting in this general area and with a little longer timeline, because I think you'd get a lot more people if
Okay.
they know about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're saying that, because like I told you, time limit isn't a problem to me. I eat this stuff up. I've lived this stuff for a long time. Wanted the opportunity to be able to be with my brothers and sisters that feel and know the same way, and to me, it's very important. And I do think it's important that we understand that folks need to stay in their lane. We do not need to have that conflict. Look, here's something that bothers me. Farming has been around since the Garden of Eden, right? And so has the wildlife. And so there's been a mix of both and a coexistence, if you will. But one of the reasons that we have dead deer, especially, going up the highways and the interstates, is because the habitat is so poor in some of the state land that they come out to browse and to on that grass. And then they play in traffic and get killed. Let's face it, that's how it's happening. And so for me, that's a problem where, somebody will say to me, the deer population's up. You can't prove that. They're all estimated numbers that the Game Commission gives, and right now they're killing deer as we sit. The ag tags are going on right now. They're killing deer. Every doe that's carrying at least 2 fawns, that's 3 dead deer. Okay? Mathematically, it doesn't work to keep butchering the deer and think you're going to have that amount next year. If you can do that kind of math with money, I'm all in. I don't care if it's Bitcoin or what it is, but I'm all in, because that math is amazing. If you're going to drive down the road and tell me that the deer population's up, and I want to know in your open fields of 20, 30 acres why there's no deer standing out there in the middle of the day. Because they're hiding somewhere in a fence row or a wood patch or wherever. And then they come out to eat. I mean, come on now. And if you want to start giving grants to people to put fence around their farms, does my wife get one for her hostas? I mean, really, if you think about it, where does it end? Where does it end? Food for thought. I'd love to have your input.
Yeah, I was just saying, we own a property in Bedford, right there where the Osterberg, Salem area, we're right in the heart of it. But we see a lot of, we seen a one sick deer last year in turkey season. You could get close to him, and we were like, neighbors saying, that's CWD, shoot it, Merv. I'm like, I'm not shooting it. But as a whole, we have a lot of healthy deer that we see. We have a big mountain there, but it's concerned that the neighbors saying, well, the game warden wants to come in, or game commission, and shoot our deer. I was like, here's our, can't do that. We want to hunt them.
That's right.
But
that's right.
I think the natives wouldn't allow it. There's too many people against it, but.
Well, and I think that's a good power to have. I think that's a good, again, look the avian flu. Rep Zimmerman could speak to this probably better than anybody in this room. But I don't believe that you kill healthy birds to try to keep the disease from spreading. That don't make any sense to me. Unless you want to raise the price of poultry or eggs or something else, then I understand what you're about. But to kill healthy birds and then put them on a compost pile for the vultures to hit and then go spread the avian flu somewhere else. It doesn't even make any sense. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I want to say something about this CWD pollution of the soil. You could have the pollution of the soil by this, but if CWD, which we don't really know what it is, okay, so-called misfolded protein, if it's so toxic, I want you to think about this, and deer have this. First of all, how do you have one deer in an enclosure with 100 and only one deer has it, the others don't? Second of all, if it's so toxic, how comes all the spit, all the saliva, all the excrement, all the body fluids that come from that deer, everywhere it walks, doesn't pollute the soil? I want you to explain that to me. They can't. Nobody does. They say it's for thousands of years. There's no proof to that. And right now, as we speak, those ag tags are being utilized, and guys are killing those deer, and they're taking them anywhere they want. You see why I say that confusion exists on so many levels that it doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm not the only one. I think you guys all sort of agree that there's such confusion in this. You don't know where those deer are going, and you don't know where they're being butchered. You don't know where their organs are being put. Okay? Well, if they're that toxic, why are we allowing that? Want to know what I saw 2 days ago in my neighborhood? And there's somebody in this room that I actually told him. I said, there's a buck over there in the field. It's dead. He goes, yeah, they were out here last night shooting. I got a guy who has an orchard, 3-sided with fence. Now, my wife grew up in an orchard, and she never left the property, okay? But it's not an orchard anymore. But I'm going to tell you what they do. They have a 3-sided fence. So the rest of the fence is wide open to property. So the deer all come in to eat. And then they go in there and they slaughter them. And then they run off and they die somewhere. The buzzards get a lot of food. And whoever else can get on them. But how is that game management? I mean, honestly, people, it's such confusion that I don't understand how we continue and think that this is going to be right. Really, honestly. And I would say to you to share with all sportsmen, don't be like a drug addict. Just because somebody gives you a doe tag, you got to try to fill it. That's not game management either. I raised 4 children, and I can tell you I raised them on venison. But I hunt private property. I'm very, I think, responsible to how I do the best for my family, even my neighbors and all that. But don't think I don't get the neighbor's deer, so to speak, because my food plots is what they like too, right? Your crops, that's right. They're only my deer when they step on my land, right? And when I kill them, then I eat them. Then they're my deer. But the Game Commission doesn't own the deer, but they think they do. Okay? So I leave you with that because there is a mix of issues here that I think we as sportsmen really got to get together and be the voice of this concerns we have. There's another video I have that I would be glad to share with you. I think I shared it with Dave this week. There's a virologist who is now retired. Did you get to see it all? And she put out the avian flu concerns that she has about the message that's being sent. So I just think it's always worthwhile to understand that, you know, just because somebody has PhD behind their name doesn't mean that they don't have an agenda or that they have a post hole digger. Is that what that means? Or piled higher and deeper. Anyway, little lightening up for the night. But anyway, I appreciate everybody being here. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that I appreciate you guys coming and talking to us. The Game Commission, the game wardens in this area, they come to our Sportsman's Club meetings and they talk to us. You guys now have come and talked to us, and it means something to us. It's nice to be heard.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that.
And just one other thing. What 5 things did you do last week?
I asked my staff that this week. They didn't think it was funny.
He asks me every week.
It was good fun tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. And stay in touch.
Thanks for you. Thank you.